The Missouri Ozarks were cloaked in a quiet, unbroken stillness, a world of dense pine forests and snow-covered hills. The year was 1886, and winter had begun early, painting the landscape in stark shades of white and gray. In the midst of this solitude, a small wooden cabin stood alone, its roof sagging slightly under the weight of frost. This cabin belonged to Eliza Harper, a woman whose name was spoken with a mixture of fear and curiosity in the nearby town. They called her the Widow in the Woods. Rumors surrounded her like a fog. Some said her husband had died tragically, leaving her embittered. Others claimed men who visited her cabin never returned. Children would stop playing when the wind carried her name, and mothers would clutch their skirts tightly, warning their children to stay far from the forest. Yet Eliza lived quietly, tending her small garden, chopping wood and cooking over a fire that always seemed to burn a little brighter than the cold outside. She rarely ventured to town, and when she did, she kept her head low, exchanging polite nods rather than conversation. There was a strength in her solitude, a resilience that both intrigued and frightened the townsfolk. One stormy evening, a man stumbled upon her cabin. Thomas Carver, a weary traveler, had wandered too far while hunting and had become hopelessly lost. Rain soaked his clothes, his boots squelched with water, and his teeth chattered uncontrollably. Eliza opened the door, her lantern casting a warm glow across the threshold. "Come in," she said gently. "The storm is no place for a man to wander alone." Thomas hesitated, aware of the rumors, yet her voice carried genuine concern. He stepped inside, feeling the warmth of the fire and the smell of roasted root vegetables. For the first time in days, he felt safe. Eliza motioned to a bench. "Sit, dry your clothes." "You must be freezing." Thomas obeyed, the tension in his shoulders slowly melting away. The warmth of the fire was not the only comfort. Her eyes held a quiet kindness, a softness he hadn't expected. The cabin was small but inviting. Quilts, carefully patched, lined the benches. Jars of preserves and dried herbs filled the shelves. A few well-worn books leaned against one another, their pages yellowed and cracked with age. As they sat by the fire, Eliza spoke of her late husband, Samuel, who had built the cabin with his own hands. "He loved this place," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Every beam, every stone, it was his gift to me." And then he was gone. Thomas listened, captivated by her words. "I'm sorry," he said softly. She shook her head. "Do not pity me. I am not bitter. I only miss him." Despite the sorrow in her voice, there was no trace of anger, only the quiet strength of someone who had endured unimaginable loss and chosen to continue living. After dinner, Thomas's eyes wandered to a staircase leading down into darkness. "What's down there?" he asked cautiously. Eliza's hand trembled slightly as she replied, "That is a place of memories." Not for strangers' curiosity, however, gnawed at Thomas. There was something about her warning that felt like an invitation wrapped in secrecy. That night, as he lay under the blankets she had prepared, sleep evaded him. Thoughts of the cellar and its hidden contents swirled in his mind. What could be so private and so important that even this kind widow would not let him see? Meanwhile, back in the town, the whispers about Eliza grew louder. Farmers and hunters spoke in hushed tones of the men who had vanished after visiting her cabin. "She lures them in, and they never return," some said. Children were warned not to venture near the forest. Even lawmen avoided the woods, claiming it held its own rules, unspoken and unforgiving. Fear had taken root, sprouting tall tales and ghost stories, while the truth remained buried in the quiet, snow-covered hills. Yet Thomas, who had met her and experienced her kindness firsthand, began to doubt the stories. Perhaps the widow was misunderstood, a lonely woman whose compassion was mistaken for danger. The following evening, Thomas asked Eliza about her life. She spoke softly, almost to herself, about Samuel, their dreams, and the void left in her life after his death. "I am not as feared as they say," she confessed. "I am only lonely. And sometimes, the forest remembers what I cannot." Her words revealed a depth of sorrow tempered by strength. Thomas could see that the rumors were cruel distortions. Here was a woman who had endured loss yet chosen empathy over bitterness, and in her solitude she had preserved something precious. The next day Thomas helped Eliza gather firewood. As they moved through the forest, he noticed strange markings carved into the trees, symbols that seemed like warnings or guides. "The woods remember those who come here," Eliza said quietly. "They guard my sorrow as I guard theirs." Thomas shivered, sensing something almost magical in her words. The forest seemed alive, holding her secrets and protecting her solitude as fiercely as she had herself. Later that day, Thomas noticed a trapdoor slightly ajar. With Eliza outside collecting herbs, he couldn't resist lifting it and peering down. The cellar was dimly lit, lined with shelves filled with boxes, jars, and bundles of letters. Expecting horrors, Thomas instead saw personal belongings, buttons, coins, handkerchiefs, small mementos. This was not a place of harm, but a place of memory. Thomas descended cautiously, opening a box. Letters described encounters with travelers who had sought her help. She had not lured men to harm them. She had lured them to offer shelter, warmth, and companionship when the world had turned its back. Eliza returned, startled. "I wanted to remember them," she said softly. "They trusted me when no one else would." Thomas's heart softened. The rumors were cruel fabrications. Her cellar was not sinister. It was a testament to compassion, carefully preserved and honored. Thomas explored further, finding letters recounting gratitude. One soldier described surviving a harsh winter thanks to her care. A farmer's child wrote of food that kept their family alive. The jars and bundles were not trophies. They were proof that kindness mattered. Even in isolation, a single life of empathy could touch countless others. Thomas realized that the world had misjudged her. The widow who had lured men to her cabin was, in truth, a guardian of memory, a preserver of humanity in a world that often forgot the small acts of love that kept it whole. Thomas spent the following days with Eliza, helping her around the cabin, chopping wood and preparing meals. But more than work, he immersed himself in the stories she carried, stories of hunters lost in the snow, travelers who were hungry, weary, or sick, and soldiers passing through the Ozarks. Each story ended in gratitude. Travelers who once had nowhere to turn left with renewed hope, some returning to their families, others moving on, carrying her kindness with them in ways she would never know. Thomas realized that Eliza's quiet acts of compassion were powerful, rippling far beyond the cabin walls. The world might have feared her, but he saw a woman whose life had made a tangible difference. Proof that empathy, even when unseen, leaves a mark. Word spread through the town that Thomas had been spending time with the widow. Fear escalated. Rumors of men being taken by Eliza became louder and more terrifying, fueled by superstition and misunderstanding. Before long, a small mob gathered, torches in hand, hearts heavy with suspicion and dread. They marched into the forest, determined to confront the so-called danger lurking in the trees. Eliza, however, did not flee. She stood at her cabin door, calm yet sorrowful. Her eyes reflected the weight of years spent in solitude, yet they also held a quiet hope. She trusted that truth would outshine fear. The mob demanded to see the cellar. "Show us your secrets," they shouted, voices trembling with anger and anticipation. Thomas stepped forward. "She has harmed no one. Look for yourselves." Reluctantly, the mob descended into the dimly lit cellar. As their eyes adjusted, astonishment replaced fear. The shelves were filled with jars and letters, each telling stories of lives touched, preserved, and cherished. There were no weapons, no trophies, only mementos of gratitude and hope. For the first time, they saw Eliza not as a villain, but as a guardian of humanity, a woman whose kindness had been misunderstood. Among the letters, one stood out. A soldier had written of surviving a brutal winter thanks to her care, describing nights when hunger and cold would have claimed him, if not for her generosity. Another letter from a farmer's child recounted food and warmth that had kept their family alive during a harsh season. The mob's fury melted into shame. The anger that had driven them forward gave way to awe. They realized how quick they had been to judge. Eliza's tears, once feared, were now tears of relief. In the days that followed, townsfolk visited the cabin openly, bringing food, helping repair the roof, and listening to her stories. Fear transformed into respect, and suspicion into admiration. Eliza showed them that small acts of empathy, mending a coat, sharing bread, offering advice, could ripple far beyond the moment, touching lives in ways the world might never see. She became a symbol of quiet courage and compassion, teaching the town that kindness often exists where it is least expected. Time passed. Travelers continued to find refuge at Eliza's cabin. They left small gifts, letters of gratitude, and news of lives changed. Thomas chronicled these stories, ensuring that her quiet acts of generosity would be remembered long after she was gone. Children of the town learned from her example. They understood that bravery and courage could take many forms. Sometimes it was the courage to show compassion when the world expected suspicion. Her cellar, once feared, grew into a museum of gratitude and human connection. It was no longer a symbol of danger, but of hope. On quiet nights, Eliza would sit in the cellar alone, reading letters and examining the jars she had carefully labeled over the years. Each note, each memento, reminded her that even in isolation, her life mattered. Her grief, which had once threatened to consume her, had become a gift, a lens through which she could see the humanity in every visitor and preserve it with care. She understood now that her solitude had not been a prison, but a sanctuary for empathy, a place where kindness could grow undisturbed. Her heart, once heavy with loss, now brimmed with peace. She had made a difference, and that knowledge brought her comfort. The town itself began to change alongside Eliza. Farmers, hunters, and children sought her advice, visited her cabin, and shared their own lives with her. The fear and suspicion that had once ruled their hearts were replaced by understanding and appreciation. Courage, they learned, was not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it was measured in quiet deeds, small acts of empathy that could ripple through generations. Eliza's grief had become the seed for compassion, and the community's respect for her wisdom grew with every passing year. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas discovered a letter tucked inside a jar, addressed to no one in particular. "Do not fear the shadows of the world. Shadows teach us light. Remember those who came before you and carry their kindness forward." They framed the letter on the wall of the cabin, a tangible reminder of Eliza's philosophy and the enduring power of compassion. Visitors would later see it and understand the wisdom she had lived by her entire life. Eliza passed quietly one early morning, leaving the cabin to Thomas and the townsfolk who had grown to love and respect her. Her cellar, her sanctuary, remained intact, a museum of human connection and gratitude. Visitors who entered the cabin after her passing saw the jars, letters, and mementos. They discovered stories of courage, resilience, and simple acts of kindness. The widow, who had once lured men into her cabin, had, in truth, inspired generations. Her life demonstrated that empathy, even when misunderstood, leaves ripples of hope far beyond what we can imagine. The moral of her story was clear. Even the most solitary or misunderstood lives can leave profound legacies. Compassion, courage, and empathy, quietly practiced, have the power to transform fear into understanding, suspicion into trust, and loneliness into enduring hope.